see. Oh, I know what I'll tell you today. A story my mother used to tell me about a boy and girl named Joringle and Jorinde. Once upon a time, an old castle stood deep in the middle of a forest. It belonged to a witch who had a power that allowed her to turn herself into an owl at sunset. Not only that, but she could cast a spell on anyone who walked within 100 yards of her castle. They'd have to stand very still until she set them free, or until she turned them into a bird and take them away to be caged in her castle with hundreds of other birds. Now one day, Joringle and Jorinde, boy and girl who were in love and who were planning their wedding day, walked into the forest. They knew they'd have to be careful not to get too close to the witch's castle. Oh, but it was such a beautiful day, and they were so happy they weren't paying attention. Well, it started to get dark, and they heard the screech of an owl. "Oh, no," said Joringle, when he realized how close they'd come to the castle. But it was too late. His beloved Jorinde was already turned into a small bird, and he was frozen where he stood. When the witch finally released him, Jorinde was gone. He was very sad about the loss of his love. He wandered from town to town looking for some kind of witchcraft that might break the witch's spell, but found nothing. He must have been a very lonely young man. But one night he had a dream that seemed very real. In the dream, he found a beautiful red flower, and in its very center was a pearl. Well, the special thing about his dream was that this flower had the power to break the spell. When he awoke, his excitement was like a fever. He walked and walked, searching for that red flower in his dream. Finally, one day in a country far from his home, he found the flower, and in its center, instead of a pearl, was a single, perfect dewdrop. He held the flower very carefully and walked back many miles to the witch's castle. Oddly enough, he wasn't afraid. It was as if he knew the flower would protect him. He walked right up to the castle door, and with a touch of the flower, the door opened, and he stood in a dark hallway that went deep into the witch's home. Still he felt unafraid, and walked through many rooms and dungeons, searching for Jorinde. Finally he reached a room that held hundreds of bird cages, and in every one was a bird. He knew he'd find her somewhere among these cages, but which bird was she, and in which cage? Suddenly the witch walked up behind him and began to hiss like a snake. He turned around, and when she saw the lovely red flower in his hand, she stopped in her tracks. Her face got even meaner looking, and she yelled at him, but she came no closer. "Which of these cages holds my love, Jorinde?" he asked. "I won't tell you," replied the witch. "And what's more, I'll never let her go." "Drat," she said, "I should have kept you frozen when I had you." "I'll find her," he said, "and I'll break your evil spell." Well, when Joringle turned to look in each cage, hoping to see something in a bird's eye that might give him a clue, the witch wrapped her cape around one of the cages and began to leave the room. "Wait," he said, "I want to see what you have under your cape." She pulled away from him, but he grabbed the cage from her and touched the wing of the bird with the flower. The witch jumped back in horror as the bird turned back into the beautiful maiden Jorinde. And now that the witch's spell was broken, all the birds, one by one, turned back into the beautiful maidens they were, and it was a wonderful sight to see. For everyone but the wicked witch, of course, who had no powers left after that day. Jorinde looked at her hero and said, "I knew that you'd come," and they held each other very tight. Oh, yes, they did live happily ever after that. Oh, and by the way, they stayed away from the castle, just in case.